You're listening to Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick in association with Wexford Insurances. Challenge us at Wexford Insurances 0818 31 30 30.
On last week's show, I spoke to Jim Doyle of RDA Accountants about accessing loans from the banks, and as many listeners have contacted me over the last few weeks about the powers that the Revenue Commissioners currently have, I've asked Jim to come back into the studio to shed some light on this area. I see there the last results were published for revenue audits that were carried out over the last number of months on the paper recently. And one observation I made from looking down through the list itself was the amount of even numbers in terms of the collection amounts from individual companies across the country. Now, I can only surmise from that if it was an even number collected, it must have been a deal that was done between the revenue and the client in relation to it. What's your opinion on that?
Karl, you're very observant. Yes, you know, you're not the first person that will have picked up on that. Now, before I even comment on that, let me just say that I spend all of my time working with business owners. And from my point of view, business owners provide most of the employment in this country. They carry a huge amount of responsibility in that regard and regulation in that regard. They, in a lot of cases, don't get very well rewarded for the work that they do in terms of the salaries that they take home and the rewards they take home. And then they collect most of the taxes for revenue and for the government, VAT and PAY and PRSI. So they're a collection agent. And after all of that, they then can, at any stage, be the subject of a revenue audit, which is, I can tell you, a very, very frightening experience and can be a very, very expensive experience. So you're right, revenue have significant powers. Yes, there are even numbers in the list. I saw the list that you're referring to, and it's not possible really to have an even number because when an amount of tax is decided as being owed to revenue, a base level of tax, well then there's interest and penalties that have to be added to that, and it's very, very unlikely that it would come out as an even number. So that signifies that yes, it's negotiations take place and that figures are agreed upon as part of a revenue audit process. So the next question is, well, how come some of them end up with even numbers, and what happened to the guys that didn't end up with the even numbers? Why didn't they negotiate?
So, Jim, what would you put the difference down to between those that have the even numbers on the list and those with the odd numbers?
Well, you know, I have been involved in many revenue audits over the years, and every revenue audit has its own story in terms of what happens during it. And in any case that I have ever been involved in, I have always challenged revenue's findings. I've always done my own research to be able to produce a different set of numbers in terms of liability compared to what revenue come up with. And when you do that, and when you take on a revenue audit on that basis, it automatically means that you're going to get into some sort of a negotiation situation before you can actually agree what the final outcome is going to be. And in my experience, that is part of a revenue audit. So the result of that and the bottom line to that, it means that in cases where you actually take do the preparation work, do the analysis work, do the forensic accounting work that you actually have to do to be able to go against and counteract what revenue's findings are, well then you can disagree and negotiate with revenue. That's the difference.
Okay, for those business people that wouldn't have gone through a revenue audit in the past, what's the process?
Well, revenue will notify you, and they'll give you time. They'll allow you. They'll give you time when they want to come out and see you. They'll give you time to make a voluntary disclosure, to which will give you reduce any penalties or interest that you might incur. They'll want to come out to your premises. They'll want access to all the information. They'll want to interview the owners of the business, the directors of the company, if there's a company. And they'll want access to information so that they can determine if in their view there's anything missing. So on a simple level, that's what happens. But in practice, what happens in a lot of cases is that revenue audits can go on, sometimes for years. I have a case right now where revenue wrote back to the client 2 years. There was a 2-year gap between the revenue coming back looking for further information on a particular case, for example. And these are the things, some of the things that revenue do, and and you have to manage revenue. You have to manage a revenue audit. You have to manage the whole process. You have to. My strong advice to a business owner is that if you're in a revenue audit situation, that you better have somebody standing beside you, shoulder to shoulder, that knows what they're doing and has the experience of dealing with revenue and dealing with revenue audits, because these things can take on lives of their own and can become very, very expensive, and can become very risky for you, for the business owner. So it is a very, very difficult area, and revenue are quite active. And the message I'm getting is that there's pressure on them to become more active. And so my advice is to business owners: protect yourself and make sure, first of all, that you're complying with all the regulations, and secondly, that if in the event of a revenue audit, that you have the proper advice and support.
How do the revenue decide on who they're going to focus their audits on? Is it any way done through, let's say, on a sector-specific basis? Is there a computer system that's generating businesses, based on the fact that they've been late in terms of returns? How is it done?
Yeah, they tell us these days that the main system that they use is a computer profiling package that takes a lot of information. Don't forget that most of the information these days going to revenue is submitted to revenue online. So all of the information that's submitted to revenue online through computer systems is directly entering their computer system, and that allows revenue to be able to compare different businesses in the same sector, benchmark them against each other, pick up inconsistencies that might be showing up from one year to the next for the same client. And from that, it does throw out some suggested revenue audit targets for revenue. And they say that is the biggest, that's the main way that they decide on revenue audits. But they also do decide to focus on sectors, no question. And recently, for example, in one particular county, they have revenue have been going around from shop to shop, calling in where there's a shop handling cash, and asking about till receipts and records, and even making sample purchases. So they do focus on sectors as well, for sure.
So, Jim, what's your advice to business people out there today when they receive a letter from the revenue notifying them of an audit?
Well, Carla, obviously I would advise business people to go to their accountant first of all, and to meet with their accountant and to actually discuss how exactly they're going to handle this particular audit. Talk to your accountant about if there's any potential liabilities, and consider whether or not you should make a voluntary disclosure. As well as that, you need to decide exactly who's going to be at the meeting with revenue, and who's going to lead the meeting with revenue, and who's going to do what. You need, as a business owner, to decide if your own accountant is capable or the right person to actually represent you at a revenue audit, because there is a set of skills that you need that could be needed and very crucial in a revenue audit. So you need to make your own judgment call based on your own accountant in terms of standing beside you and representing you at a revenue audit, because it could be very, very, very expensive if it's not handled properly.
Well, Jim, I definitely think our listeners will benefit from the information that you provided us with this morning. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for coming in to speak to us, and I wish you continued success with RDA Accountants.
You're listening to South East Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick in association with Wexford Insurances. Think Wexford Insurances for your business insurance.